on a site that 10 years before was little more than a duck pond on the edge of a dying frontier town, was the ultimate symbol of manifest destiny. A giant cathedral-like structure venerating the power of the railroads and privilege of the people. It was the largest building west of the Mississippi, Denver's Union Station. Railroad hubs in the West was by no means assured in the 1860s. A dusty mining supply town 600 miles from the nearest population center, Denver teetered on the brink of collapse throughout the decade. Its only hope for survival rode on the steel rails winding west from Omaha.
When the announcement was made in 1865, he was not coming through Colorado, but instead was coming through Wyoming, the Vice President of the Union Pacific, Thomas Durant, declared that Denver was now too dead to bury.
And overnight, half of Denver heads up to Cheyenne, figuring that's going to be the Rocky Mountain metropolis. Denver came close to dying, was losing population in the mid-1860s when Editor Myers of the Rocky Mountain News, our greatest promoter, and Governor John Evans decided the railroad won't build to Denver, Denver will build to the railroad.
Community leaders rallied, forming the Denver Board of Trade, which on November 11, 1867, created the Denver Pacific Railroad and Telegraph Company. Grading began the following spring. Just over 2 years later, on June 24, 1870, Denver Pacific board members assembled on the roof of the First National Bank on Blake Street to watch the first train from Cheyenne north to Dubuque.
So in that decade, all the major rail lines arrived in Denver. You get the Kansas Pacific, the Denver Pacific, the Colorado Central, the Denver Rio Grande. So from 1870, when the railroad arrived, until 1880, Denver grows from a little over 4,700 people to 35,000 people.
By 1880, just 10 years after the completion of the Cheyenne Spur put Denver on the map, the exploding city housed no fewer than 13 railway depots. Speculative business minds began to recognize that if all Denver's depots could be combined into one, then the man who did that combining would reap huge rewards. Few were surprised when that man turned out to be New York City railway tycoon Jay Gould. Gould had already made millions through ethically questionable but financially brilliant speculations in railroad stock. In 1873, he took advantage of a nationwide economic depression to buy a majority stake in the Union Pacific at bargain basement prices. Then, after a protracted battle with Kansas Pacific stockholders, he succeeded in taking over that railroad in 1879. Thus controlling Denver's two major trunk lines to the east, Gould was firmly in control of the city's railroad future. His first move was to advocate, along with Denver's preeminent real estate developer Walter Scott Cheeseman, the rerouting of all Denver rail lines into a single united depot. Built in the middle of 12 acres on a distant and deserted edge of town, Union Station stretched to 880 feet in length and 140 feet in width, including platform and tracks. The building itself was built in an elaborate French Gothic style with double-pitched mansard roof and giant dormer windows trimmed in Manitou sandstone. But by far the boldest architectural statement came from a 180-foot tower, reminding each passerby of Denver's ambitions to be not just the Queen City of the Plains, but one of the most important new commercial centers of the world. As hotels, warehouses, and stockyards quickly grew up around the station, this ambition seemed less and less far-fetched. On May 31st, 1881, S.R. Blonger, a mining superintendent from Leadville, became the first person to purchase a ticket from the newly opened Union Station ticket office. He traveled to Chicago on the Royal Rock Island Line, But soon, passengers traveling to points east from Union Station would have a choice between 6 routes, and travelers to California could choose between 3. Within just a few years of its opening, Denver's Union Station serviced 60 passenger trains per day.
As a class, the passengers traveling west from Omaha differed greatly from those with whom I journeyed to Omaha from Chicago. A considerable proportion consisted of adventurers bound to California to seek their fortune. Very few were traveling for their pleasure. To nearly everyone, the journey is a new one, partaking of the character of a daring enterprise. William Fraser Ray, 1874.
Following completion of the transcontinental line in 1869, rail travel, once exotic and dangerous, was becoming part of everyday life. For the subsistence farmers, ill-treated laborers, and failed businessmen with nothing left to lose, or the true pioneers who simply wanted to be part of building something new, there was soon no substitute for the journey west.
If you wanted to ride on the train, you accepted the dirt or the cinders. Back in the early days, why, there was no air conditioning on the passenger cars. And so the air conditioning was opening the window. You opened the window and the cinders came in.
Derailments from poor track and grading were routine delays, and all able-bodied male passengers were expected to help hoist the train back onto the tracks or clear away the snow. Still, passengers took comfort in the notion that they would accomplish in a matter of days a journey that just a few years earlier was measured in months. Working behind the scenes to make this miracle possible were the men who ran the trains, a growing army of conductors, porters, firemen, engineers, brakemen, switchmen, track maintenance crew, and ticketing and baggage personnel. For many, the challenges were formidable. In 1888 alone, over 2,000 railroad men were killed in action, and more than 20,000 injured.
It is a dangerous profession. Everything that's done is done around heavy equipment that is not forgiving. You do something wrong, you're going to get hurt.
Before air brakes, the brakeman would climb on top of the cars, and he would go to where the brake handles are, jerry around the brake handle, running up and down on the roof of the cars until it got slow enough that the engineer could control it with the engine brake. A lot of brakemen fell off cars and were killed.
United by the adventure and perils of their work, the railroaders felt a deep sense of brotherhood, formalized by a growing number of trade unions to protect the interests of workers and their families. Improvements followed. The installation of air brakes made trains safer. Candles were replaced by oil lamps, wood-burning stoves by hot water heat. By the time Denver's Union Station opened its doors in 1881, Western rail travel had achieved a level of luxury and comfort rivaling some of the most prestigious trains of Europe. Much of this was thanks to Chicago industrialist George Pullman, who placed comfortable rail travel within the reach of America's burgeoning middle class with efficiently designed, mass-produced sleeper cars. Pullman staffed his cars with African-American porters and stewards, among them many former slaves. Although restricted to service jobs, they prided themselves on their professionalism. Pullman was soon the largest employer of African Americans in the nation, enabling thousands of blacks to join the ranks of the middle class. Their community in Denver was a short streetcar ride from Union Station.
The Pullman porters brought a great economic base to the Bibles. They had regular salaries, and that allowed them to have and purchase property, as well as they had families. The wives very often were able to stay at home, and they supported the social life. They had their own clubs. They were the sharpest dressed young men around.
The steady rise in Denver's traffic required an increase in the number of tracks at Union Station from 7 to 13. In 1892, additional baggage and waiting rooms were added, and still the station strained to accommodate its ever-growing burden of people and materials. So much so that 2 years later, an event that might have been deemed a disaster